Hello, my friends in Brac, and I think you're in Uganda right now. I'm Judith Bruce, and I was asked to provide some input into your meeting. I'm flattered by this. I began working with Brac in 1976. I don't think Brac would remember, but I do. And it was in Camilla District at a time of what I think was a human-induced famine. I'm speaking to you today about the issue of targeting the poorest girls in the poorest communities. And before I begin, I wanted to introduce the team that's here that helped put this together on such a short notice. So the first is Vera David, my colleague who is works on geographic positioning and mapping. Vera. Naquan Davis, who is managing the audio visuals, which are a complete mystery to me, as is anything mechanical, Naquan. And Karen Scriven from Plan USA, who's visiting right now and has agreed to be the test audience. Here's Karen. There she is. Fine. Great. And who's not here is Sajda Amin, my great friend who has worked with Brac throughout all these years. The themes for today's talk have been selected from sessions we had with over a couple of weeks with Brac staff, but most recently we had a kind of capacity building for strategic planning, for planning at scale to reach the poorest girls in the poorest communities. I'm especially excited to have Brac in our circle of learning because of all the things that you know that we can learn from. There were several items in what we have pursued as development practice, which in fact I think Brac originated. And we've come to the point in our work with adolescent girls and making targeted investments in them that we have, I think, some new information to offer that will take what is already good practice to be better practice. I'm going to talk about three subjects: recognizing and animating the social contract, the potential of your original 16 promises, and a renewed community contract. The process by which you select the girls you work with, reaching girls at the highest risk of the worst outcomes at a strategic age. In effect, this is taking a human rights approach, but making an allocation tool, which I think we increasingly have to do. Resources and time and people have limits. We've got to use them well. And lastly, program tools, visualizing the community and the girls to improve targeting to the poorest and increasing value for money. And these are tools we are employing all over the world. I won't show you the map today, but basically, these are program tools. They may have a research application, but I'm speaking to you as a person who's primarily interested in things reaching Earth. We do, however, need to at some point study them to evaluate their impact. The first subject, finding the existing contract in relation to girls. This is established through constitutions, the MDGs, signing of conventions, and CEDAW to make promises to populations. Now, if I'm a girl in a rural community, this is maybe how this is how my community looks, but perhaps not to me. It has many entitlements and services and facilities that I don't have access to. But, and I'm going to ask Vera to make this a full screen, so you can lose me for a moment. The boys have access, not perfect, but much more than the better off girls who have access, less perfect. And the access of these two groups is much greater than this bottom 40% of excluded girls. In each community, this community of excluded girls will differ in their composition. But as a guideline, this bottom 40% are negligibly present, often completely absent from what often is hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars of investment within their communities. When we had our sessions a few weeks ago, people asked, what's the scale plan? I said, well, the scale plan basically is getting our girls integrated into that investment, which is their birthright and in many cases the pride of their countries and their constitutions. We'll be talking about that a bit later. So when we go into communities and look around, and when my daughter was about 4, she used to talk about there being quote-unquote resources. What are the resources? Service hours. Health services and their hours, emergency services, schools, NGO programs, youth programs, which rarely, if ever, see girls in most countries. Commercial and market centers, training centers, financial institutions, credit sources, beauty parlors, wine stores. There's lots of stuff on the ground in even the poorest places. We were just working in Bihar, and in a community of 365 people, there were 20 different places where people gathered where something important happened, but you didn't find girls there. We then look to map within those communities what the services are. And we have a visual, you'll see a lot of which we call the oval. So these empty dots are places, facilities, entitlements. and then we have our girls at the side. And again, in each setting, we must establish who has access. The boys, better off girls, and what happens to our excluded girls. Where are they currently, and where could they be? To give you a little bit of background, and there's a lot more data here, and I know you're interested as a learning institution, we have done what we call coverage exercises in many countries. These are results from just 5, and they're African countries, as to who actually gets access to youth services, meaning youth centers, peer education, which are the two that are most often community-based. And there is a terrible inversion of care, with the better off young people having much more access. We have more depth to this data, but basically if you're older, male, live with 2 parents, are native born, you have much, and are in school, you are much more likely to have access to the safety net services, the investments made to pick up the bottom. You have negligible investment almost everywhere in the under 15 age group. This is partially an artifact of the terrible policy, and I think it's a terrible policy, of youth being benchmarked to age 15, which completely misses puberty for girls. This is literally benchmarked against the male life cycle, and extending as late as 35, a device for, I think, disguising unemployment, more politically motivated than certainly evidence-based, and extremely discriminatory against females. If youth services, better named adolescent services, are a function for girls, they need to begin by age 10 because their lives unfold between 10 and 14, and we'll talk about that later. So basically what's being invested in now, and virtually none of it is reaching these excluded populations. Now, I remember Brac had these 16 promises, and it made a great impression on me as a young professional in the field because it began to help someone who is at the bottom of a pyramid see themselves as part of a social contract, part of a place, a sort of line from their head to the parts of society. In the United States, you can do what's called a class action case. You can literally sue because you have a direct right. But the concept of having a direct right that isn't mediated by a parent or a teacher is a very strong one. And the promises seem to me to be a shape for communities to say something good is about to happen here, but we have to do our part, and we have to define ourselves as a community which has a social contract and defines codes of fairness and decency and so forth. There's a great deal to be done within that framework, perhaps a renewed framework, to reach these poorest girls. These are some of the ways in which we have engaged communities. When we go into communities, in the ideal, not always, the dialogue with the community begins with seeing very generally what they feel they would do in support of a program that reached these excluded populations. They can support safe house-to-house surveys or just simply inquiries into who's in the household, nothing as grand as a full research process. They can facilitate a recruitment process that gets to the ones that you prioritize. They can provide space in existing facilities for meetings, recruitment, training, and follow-up, and permanentize them, not just as a one-off. They can establish places where girls can meet regularly and again permanently and notify the community of that. They can create safety zones, put street lights in, develop specific security and protection measures. Monitors on playgrounds, for example. Girls love to play, but without female monitors, sometimes it means that asset is out of their reach. Give girls personal documentation. We're about to bring out a monograph on girls' migration, and at least in sub-Saharan Africa, girls predominate in migration streams in adolescence. So you have higher populations of unattached females that is unattached either to families or communities for whom personal documentation may be especially important. And in rural areas, it's especially important not just as an identity asset, but to establish your age in relation to child marriage and other important rights that must not be violated. To enforce protective laws systematically, and key, and I think a great frontier for us to work on, to organize service provisions, entitlements, and times of day and seasons and weeks, which make them more accessible to girls. You can get a post office account in both India and Egypt, but if a young girl alone, even in a group, has to deal with a male postal worker, it's probably less likely. Imagine that just one afternoon a week you have a female there, so the females in the community of whatever age feel encouraged that this is a right that they can also exercise. but we need to move towards explicit definition of what we want so that we begin to track change not just at the level of the population of girls we're interested in, but the level of the community. Our goal is twofold: to make these communities better places for girls and to build the social assets of girls, and when they're done conjointly, there's a synergistic effect. This is the poster that's used in Guatemala to signify that the school, which is ordinarily locked at 3 p.m, is 2 afternoons a week a place for girls, and the keys are symbolically handed over by the jefe, who is always a male, to the 17 or 18-year-old girl mentors. They actually have the keys to the school. Getting these posters up was really important because you can't have policy change if it's still a secret. It has to be noted. It has to be branded. This is another example. In Addis Ababa, where there are very large populations of disconnected and migrant girls, they come without documentation, which, in addition to making them vulnerable, means that what services are there, they don't feel a relationship to. So an agreement was made with the Kabeli chiefs and later with the comparable entity in the rural areas that they would give the girls personal identifications. The program made them, and then they were stamped by the chief of the Kabeli. These are 2 of the girls who are in domestic service, who are otherwise kind of invisible, suddenly feeling part of this community. And we need to, in planning our programs, keep girls at the center while managing the threats and gatekeepers in her environment. I won't read this chart, and I don't expect you to, but what's important here is the girl as our client. The gatekeeper we may have to get by as a matter of tactics. Later on, strategically, they may change their minds. But our job is to give her access, whatever it is we have to do. And the last column in this says, what do we want for the girls in this segment? And that's where I want people to begin to think, what is it that's already in the community where there are investments where we could index girls, give girls the access that they have a rights to, with some selectivity. But nonetheless, not just giving up and saying all we can do is invest in the girls and then hope it goes right, but making specific plans. Going back to the oval. So once we've mapped the community, filled in those resources, we begin and mapped in girl segments, which I'll get to later. We then make plans to connect girls, these are 3 different girl segments, to the resources in their community. A partnership between the girls and the facilities and the community structure. And when we get detailed, this is a very complex one, you can see in the middle, and I'm going to point, right in the middle there, we've detailed some examples of more detailed plans. So, for example, just to read you one, we are suggesting that there be specific hours for engagement of females and referees and mentors in the playing field. The work we did in Egypt, we had girls playing sports, but they had no playing field access. We had to guarantee that. We're suggesting that cash transfers might be given directly through girl platforms. I think some of that work, for instance, is going on in Bangladesh. We might suggest, as I said earlier, that the post office have special personnel to help you get a bank account and so forth. Whatever these are, they need to be specific and accountable plans and part of a community contract going forward. Number 2, which girls? First, consider the cross-sectional data. These are data showing the variations in levels of child marriage in Bangladesh. Many of you are quite familiar with this. That may be that you're especially interested in girls in that category. And I bring up child marriage because it's a legally guaranteed. This is in the framework of not just would be nice, but it's guaranteed that girls are not to be married under age 18. And if they are, they've been failed in some way by the promises of their state. And these are data on girls 10 to 14 not in school and not living with either parent in Uganda. These are often huge populations. It numbers 500,000 in Nigeria, 400,000 in Ethiopia, 140,000 in Mozambique. And these are girls who are unambiguously failed by the system and at risk. And sorry, missed one. Then these school-age females in Bangladesh, not in school. I'm sure you're familiar with these data, again showing variation. But interestingly, it doesn't co-vary, doesn't match the other maps. So depending on what you're looking for, you may end up in different parts of the country. This is data showing the percent of girls 15 to 24, and we have done these maps for lots of countries, who justify domestic violence. In other words, where do we have the most intense internalization of negative norms, where the population of girls is already censoring themselves and defining themselves as worthy of abuse. This is data on those who've experienced physical abuse in Zambia, rising to 60% in one area. And this is a composite for Nigeria, in which we overlay the females 10 to 14 not in school and not living with either parent. As I said, it's a huge population with the conflict zones. So you actually have the data available to put numbers to this and discover what universe of girls you're especially interested in. But you're not done. You must combine the cross-sectional data with data on timing within the human rights and human capabilities perspectives. Yes, everyone has rights and needs, but we must make some distinctions in deciding where our resources should go. In early adolescence, girls irretrievably lose their rights. Many girls irretrievably lose their rights. There are rights delayed. I get my savings account a little late. Not great, but not terrible. I leave school. Catch-up really isn't that realistic, but it's plausible. But here are some things in which you never really get it back. You experience FGM. Someone takes a piece of your body away. You experience forced sex, which apart from the pain of the event may rob you of a sense of identity and the rights to control your body, so that many messages about agency and health lose their meaning, to say nothing of the trauma. You become infected with HIV, though obviously we have more methods of treatment. It still is a life changer. You never don't have it. Or you have a child when you are still a child. These are things which are a permanentized negative, from which there is not impossible but more difficult recovery. And these were the conditions the Council prioritized when it started its adolescent girls program. We brought our resources to those hotspots where girls either were at very high risk of child marriage or HIV, in places where sometimes the ratio female to male was as high as 8-to-1, or both in a place like Ethiopia. And our goal was, among other things, to build their health, social, and economic assets so they may prevent, mitigate, or leave unsafe sexual relationships, which were a core of where the abuse for girls was settled. Investing in young adolescent girls has important health and population effects. Obviously, females always deserve investment, but investment in the youngest girls in ways that allow them to delay childbearing by 5 years has enormous effects on fertility. That's an issue for many of the countries you work in. It varies in most countries between 37% and 41 or 42%. It happens to be extremely high return in Bangladesh. And it would directly avert 39%, I think 39%, a full 39% of future population growth in the world. That's the direct effect. The indirect effects are enormous as well. That's for another talk. And a high proportion of girls will become single mothers. The failure to invest in them is in effect planned poverty. The girls at the highest risk of being single mothers are those who were married as children. Girls become single mothers, and these are minimum boundary estimates, ranging from 30% in Ethiopia to 70% in Zimbabwe. And this is just the minimum estimate. Either a girl who is officially a mother on her own, premaritally, or divorced, or widowed. All other informal arrangements and forms of economic abandonment are not included here. So, and the girls, what you'll see in many places is those who marry early have higher divorce rates. So they enter two kind of risk pools, one as child brides and then later on as divorced young women with limited resources. So investments in girls in ways that allow them to delay marriage and childbearing are really essential and linked to this long-term poverty trajectory. When to intervene? This is data from Guatemala, and it shows three really important things. At around age 10, we've got 75% of the girls in school, lower than we'd like, all right? It descends rapidly at puberty to the point where there are only 20% graduate. Now, the puberty, we did the testing of the data here, is the dropout at puberty has to do with puberty, not with their performance in school. Has to do with the notion that at this point they're quote-unquote becoming women. The oldest adolescent girl in a household often becomes kind of the junior husband of the mother who needs help. And this is an area where there's a lot of women on their own. But there's some good news here. We have 20% of the girls who actually graduated despite these circumstances from high school, and we pick them up as mentors. The cavalry is there. The girls we need to work with the other girls are already there. And in many cases, the survivors of this tough process are not used in programs. This shows you how regular this puberty dropout is. Here is data from 4 countries, and you see where dropout happens, and you see we need to intensify investment about 2 years earlier. So these are data from Egypt, Turkey, Guatemala, and And Kenya, thank you very much. Program tools. Why visualize data? I introduced Vera at the beginning, and she's been working with us to help our staff understand how direct, simple, and programmatically essential it is to visualize data. Why? To find out the shape of the community as girls and others experience it and make it official. To identify within the community catchment areas those potential resources I showed in the oval. To enumerate, locate, and segment girls in the area. All our girls are not all alike, and we need to know how many we have in each category. To make program decisions about which girls to target, given limited resources and geographic concentration, and some categories of girls may live near each other and both drop in and drop out in a group. To conduct intentional recruitment for segment-specific programs, and by girl subpopulation plan and monitor participation. Programs that mix groups of girls see dropout, but they don't know who dropped out and why. And with homogenized groups of girls, you don't always understand what each subgroup needs. And at the level of the community, define safely the access to resources and chart the community transformation. So essentially, it allows us to also, within given areas, see not only have we affected changes in girls that are measurable, we can measure changed access and institutionalization of pro-girl policies in specific areas. This is an example from Guatemala in which the community boundaries were drawn by walking around and sort of clicking, I guess an Android phone. Was it an Android phone or a GPS device or something? And I'm very technically literate, you can see. And then creating just an image. And this can be uploaded to Google Earth so people see, oh, that's where we live. Back to this is the top of the circle has just been defined, the catchment area in which we're going to look at community resources. And then this is a map in which we place those community resources within that bounded map. The next group we need to find and locate are the subpopulations of girls, and we can find other things as well, but I'm focusing on them right now. We do this in service of a human rights framework as an allocation tool to start with the poorest girls in the poorest communities, and if we don't, we will not reach them. To improve the value for money, the same investment, but more dramatic results. If you get to the girls who really need the program, the results are better, and the time and effort you've invested is justified. And the ability to evaluate. Often we look at a program, we can't evaluate it because we didn't have a tight enough problem statement, and we certainly can't scale it. You can only scale tight prototypes. Now, this is an example from the council. Upper Egypt, we were doing work in communities of about 7,000. Though they went house to house originally to talk about the program, they allowed it to be demand-led. And in the first batch, only 10% of those who came to the program were in our priority cell, that is 12 to 13 with no school. We radically changed the understanding of, first of all, our partners and our recruitment, so that now 42% of those in the program are 12 to 13 having no school, which of course means that the value for money proposition put here is much greater. When I had, and you'll notice in that first slide, the largest group were girls 14 to 15 with some schooling. So at time one, on a scale of 1 to 10 in reading, they were already at 6. The best we could do was raise them to 10. But when you get the correct girls, you can take them from a very low baseline to a much higher increment. And it's what we intended to do, and in fact what we've achieved. This program, because we made that early course correction, now has some really very good results and is being extended. A second example, this is within girl populations. You have girls in the program, you say, oh, there are a lot of girls here, but you don't know what it is they're getting and you don't know who they are. So this is a program from an urban Africa. Beautiful program, had wonderful health, social, economic resources, just terrific, but a very skewed participation. And if you were a school-going girl, 15 to 19 in secondary school, you were almost 9 times more likely to be in the program than if you were a girl 10 to 14 out of school. And in this case, these were all in very densely packed urban areas. So within walking distance of this center were 558 girls, 10 to 14 out of school. Just a matter of going and getting them. They would have loved that program, but unfortunately their elite sisters took over most of the space, and the largest space was taken over by their elite brothers. And this is an example from South Asia, which shows that they were reaching 40% of the girls in the community, but it was still skewed insofar as you were about 2.5 times more likely to be in the program if you were in school than out of school, and 2.5 times more likely to be in the program if you were unmarried than married. Now, the good news for this program is that about 25% of the participants did come from the most vulnerable sector. But this could be improved, I think, to as high as 75 to 85% with targeted recruitment. Now, there's some good and easy tools you can use to do this. There's simple ones, paper maps, they work well, and then using Google Earth to be added later. Willing and welcome enumerators and grabbing GPS points with and without GPS device can be added later. It takes 10 minutes per household to get some pretty basic information, and here's the information. Again, you can read it later, or you can make it less than this, but this is kind of the basic stuff that you need to get to at least get grosso modo a sense of who's in your community and which households. This is my little hand-drawn map of households you want to target, and the X is our girls 8 to 12, and it should be double X is our girls 13 to 18. And then you separate them. You go to the households and decide you're going to need 2 girl groups. Some communities you need 3 or 4, meeting at different times, reaching normally between 30% and 80% of eligible girls, depending on the severity of their conditions. So when you're working on something as serious as child marriage, you want to get a very high proportion of the girls at the highest risk of child marriage. Often we're already going door to door. Let's make those visits count for something. 10 minutes probably isn't that much time to spend just collecting basic information. And we have some willing and able participants to do it. These are girls in Haiti with pen and paper and Android phones conducting this work. And this is a picture of girls in GPS in the field in pairs who've mapped their communities. I apologize for the speed talking. I'm sorry you're not here to give me your questions, but I know we'll have a chance to engage with your staffs, and I hope next year. Thank you.